Okay. Okay, right ahead. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of North Norfolk District Council on the 25th of January, 23. Our first item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence.
Yes, we have apologies from councillors Sarah Brutikofer, councillor Nigel Housden and councillor Victoria Holliday.
Thank you. Second item is substitutes.
Yes, we have councillor John Toy for councillor Sarah Brutikofer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Public questions and statements, I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Thank you. Turning to the minutes of our last meeting. So that's the meeting we held on the 14th of December 22. Just go through them quickly for accuracy, please. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. Do you have any observations? Are you content that I should sign those as an accurate record of that meeting? Thank you. I will do that. Item 5 is items of any urgent business.
None received.
Thank you. Item 6 is declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest in respect of today's business using the guidance that's in our papers today? No. Okay, thank you. Item 7, petitions from members of the public. I'm not aware of any.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 8, consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Thank you. Item 9 is responses of the council or the cabinet to the committee's reports or recommendations.
None to report on this occasion.
Thank you. Right, turning then to item 10, which is our first substantive item on our agenda today. That is the fees and charges for 23-24, and that's an updated report. So, Councillor Seaward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you. This came before the full council in December. It was deferred given the budget considerations. So it's now come back to today. The only major changes in relation to proposed increase in charges on garden bins, which is on paragraph 2.6, going up from £52.50 to £56. That's really the only major change. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Questions in respect of this paper then, please. Yes. Councillor Heinrich.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question on the fees for filming costs. Do we take filming to include professional photography for advertising and similar purposes on our properties, or is that going to be treated separately?
Mr. Latch.
So yes, we do in terms of particularly Chroma Pier, but other assets as well. We take a view as to whether the request to film is for commercial purposes and therefore advertising or an element of profit, relative to the positive exposure that the authority may derive or the area might derive from one of our assets being used as a film set location or in a television drama, for instance, which obviously would generate positive community interest and reinforce the attraction of the district as a tourist destination. So there is some subjectivity in those decisions, but that would be those decisions would be undertaken by reference to the leader of the council, local members and portfolio holder as appropriate.
Councillor Penfold.
Thank you and good morning. Just to follow on from that, Steve. So who holds the copyright on that once that filming is done? Does it stay with us or does it stay with the organisation taking the filming? And I'm just thinking about how we then might reuse the footage in our advertising or merchandising or whatever we want, how we want to use it.
I believe at the point in time that we grant consent or authority to use, that the copyright is with the photographer or film producer. That's conveyed by that consent, is my understanding.
So are we able to use that footage in any way, or it just it stays with them and it's their property to use how they want in the future?
So sometimes we commission filming ourselves. So we have done in terms of the Chroma Pier, the sandscaping scheme at Bacton, where we've commissioned that. That would be, we would be the client, and so we would be able to use that as we wish. I think if it is a third party for purposes, we would understand that in granting of the consent. So, you know, we have had national retail chains use Chroma Pier and clothing companies as a backdrop for their marketing or for their website campaigns or whatever. And that would be explicitly stated. I don't believe once the film is or photography is complete that we would have any legitimate rights in terms of its further use.
Right, Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my question is just slightly different, just a clarity for me. At 2.1, in the introduction, it says we had a second review to see if there was a scope to increase from 5 to nearer the 9.2%. But when we get to the fees and charges header, it says this year recommendation is a 5% increase. Is that still the recommendation for 5%? The numbers seem to be similar. I just wanted to be clear that that's where we'd landed, was with the 5% and not near a 9.2. Obviously, there's some variations in that. I see that the printing appears to be about 20%. But so, yeah, I just wanted to understand what the overall aim had been at the end of it. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. We reviewed the fees and charges, and originally the increase was at 5%. And then with the pressure on the budget, we decided to review the fees and charges again to see whether we could increase them to be more in line with the current rate of inflation, which at December was 9.2. Officers considered the impact on the customer and whether there would be a fall in demand if we upped some of the price, increase some of the prices. And most of the fees it felt should remain as they were at the 5%, considering the cost of living crisis that we're going through. So by and large, they have been increased by only the 5%. Some of them, because of the rounding and the price, it leads to a larger increase than the 5%. And that's why, like you say, some of them are nearer 20.
But overall, we've stayed around that 5%. That's basically what we're doing.
Yes,
Okay,
we
thank
have,
you.
yeah.
That was it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to be clear.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? We're all done then. So the recommendation there is to recommend to full council the fees and charges from April 23 are set out in Appendix A, and the delegated authority be given to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the portfolio holder and relevant heads of service to agree those fees and charges not included within Appendix A as required in the output within the report. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Toy and Councillor Heinrich. Can I have a show of hands then, please, to do that? Thank you. Right, that's Turning then to item 11, and item 11 is the medium-term financial strategy for 23-26. Councillor Seawood.
Thank you, Chairman. I think to start with, I'd just like to say that whilst by December, the council had understood what its level of operating costs would be, what we didn't know until we got the provisional local government settlement on December the 19th, precisely what our income would be to enable us to know whether we could meet those operating costs. And we've also had a further challenge about the level of retained business rates that the council was entitled to for 23-24. So that's presented challenges. It's meant that there's had to be an awful lot of work done, not only by the finance team, but by other council officers since the 20th December. And it's also contributed to why the papers have come to you in a bit of a piecemeal state. And I apologise to the committee and to you, Chairman, for that. But that's the time pressure and the limited space that we had. The first thing in introducing this is, I will say, is that the wider context of the financial situation facing the council is essentially driven by external factors, and that is set out in paragraph 1.1 of the introduction. Many of those were not foreseen. I don't know how they could have been foreseen when 12 months ago we set the budget for 22-23. And indeed, even in April of this year, the Cabinet received an email from the then Section 151 officer, and I'll just read it to you. At a very high level, this year's funding was applied forward at the same levels. Sorry, I'll start again. If at a very high level, this year's funding was propelled forward at the same level, it would leave us with a deficit for 23-24 of about £100,000. But this is based on an awful lot of assumptions and unknowns at the present time. So thus, this must be viewed with considerable caution. As the last few years in COVID, if the last few years in COVID have taught us anything, it is that things can change very quickly within a very short space of time. I don't think I could have put anything better, Chairman, than that. Things have changed very quickly during the course of this year. Now, the challenge, I think, for the council is now we have a better understanding of where we are, is how well we manage that situation and how well it's managed going forward. So the second thing I'd really like to draw to the committee's attention this morning is the inflationary pressures that are being experienced by the council compared to what was forecast 12 months ago for this year. That is set out to you in paragraph 2.4 on page 55, and we're talking about inflationary pressures of 2.9 to £3 million, or around about 14%. Increase on what was forecast 12 months ago. So the question then is, how do we actually deal with this situation? Well, on page 55 lower down and turning into page 56, you have a table there setting out the funding which has been received from the government. The first thing I can say, which I welcome, is that there is a new funding stream this year, known as the 3% funding guarantee grant. That is new to us and certainly wasn't known to us before the provisional financial settlement came out on December the 19th. But that is worth over £1 million and is very welcome. What, however, has to be is that we've also lost some income streams. We have lost the lower tier service grant, which we received last year of £147,000. And we've also lost most of the new homes bonus. Last year, if you look at the general fund summary on paragraph 2.12 on page 57, you see it was £886,000. It is now gone down to £31,080. Now, was this expected? Well, it was and it wasn't. Again, the advice that this committee received 12 months ago in its medium-term financial strategy from the Section 151 officer was that the National Homes Bonus could continue for a further year into 23-24. Previously, Brexit negotiations and more recently the response to the COVID-19 pandemic has put plans for a new homes bonus system on hold. The likelihood of the new homes bonus being extended for a further year is low, but if the energy of the relevant government department is taken up by COVID in 22-23 to the extent it was in 2021 and 2021-22, this alternative becomes more probable, i.e. some of it could remain. So I just draw that to the committee's attention that whilst it could have gone, it wasn't certain. So that's the position that we face. We've lost the new homes bonus. So we've gained £1 million, but we've lost the lower service grant and also the new homes bonus. On my calculations, that gives us a net increase in government support this year of around about £137,000. The second thing I want to draw to the committee's attention is the retained business rates, which in the general fund summary is set out at 7.2 million. We were advised yesterday, following a review of this, that we're not entitled to that level of retained business funding for 23-24. What we are entitled to is 6.3 million. So we have to find another £900,000, and that is being suggested that comes from the business rate reserve, and that lower entitlement is due to the various COVID payments and grants that the council received during the pandemic, which we're now having to address to. And I'm sure the committee could well have further questions about this, and I know Tina Stankley would be more than happy to answer them and help the committee through this. So that's the position on that one. So we've actually had to find savings, and if you look at paragraph 2.3, the initial SIF produced savings of £396,000, but it became apparent in the light of the provisional local government settlement that we would need to do more than this, and therefore if you go to pages 63 to 71, the Cabinet has been through a list of potential savings options, and we've identified further savings of 1.2 million to give a total savings of 1.6 million. This does produce a balanced budget, and it's enabled us to broadly, and I use the word broadly, manage to maintain frontline services. There is no, at the moment, significant new revenue spend or capital spend. It's also, I'd like to draw to the committee's attention, and this is in paragraph 2.8 on page 56, that no change in the funding formula is actually proposed for 24-25. Although I am advised that the business rate next year will go back to 7.3 million. So, and then, but the year after that, it could come back down again. This is all to do with COVID payments. So on that basis, Chairman, we have a budget, a balanced budget, but these are almost final figures. We've still got some work to do around what the precise amount we will receive on retained business rates. And of course, we have a provisional local government settlement. It is not the final local government settlement, and sometimes there is a small change as a result of that. So all I can say in conclusion, if I go back to what has happened in recent years, if it teaches us anything, we never know what we're going to face in 23-24, or in terms of what the budget situation will look like in 12 months' time. There's those shortage uncertainties. And we have to proceed, I think, on the one hand with optimism, but also with caution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seawood. Just to clarify one or two points before I open up for questions. In your commentary, you seem to, according to my papers, have migrated from the MTFS paper into the draft budget paper.
Yes.
Was that your intention, or did that happen by?
Well, sorry, I was just sort of looking at agenda item 12. Let's have a look here. Yes, so I essentially was dealing with agenda item 12. That's my fault, but I could have spent a little more time on the medium-term financial strategy. But much of what I would have said in relation to what I just said also applies to the medium-term financial strategy.
Yes. Yes, I recognise there are obvious links between the two. And in fact, last year, if I remember rightly, the paper then was a combined paper, and we've now reverted back to the practice of previous years where we have a separate budget and a separate medium-term financial strategy. So just want to be clear then, the comments I think that you made have taken us into 12, but we'll pick up 12 in due course, and I'll give you the opportunity of readdressing us if you wish on 12. But if we just stick with item 11, I seem to remember actually last year when you addressed us, I think the phrase that I remember that you used was that, Mr. Chairman, the storm clouds are gathering. And that was from obviously January thereabouts a year ago. And I do take your point that in the last 12 months, things have moved apace, probably a pace that you hadn't anticipated, that none of us probably had quite anticipated. But I don't think that the picture that you described today was not anticipated. I think your fairly graphic expression gave us the way ahead, if you like, that there were significant challenges. And I think we had a discussion around what we might want to do in terms of preparation for meeting those challenges. So I think your situation, the situation you describe, is well understood and well recognized from a year and more ago. And we have had to deal with those things which have happened more hastily and perhaps to a greater extent than we would have expected in the last 12 months. So thank you for that. I'll open it now for questions, please. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Seawood, could I take you to page 57 on the written one, which is 3.2, and there we've got you state in there that pay inflation has been included at 2%, and the inflation on other expenditure has been included where unavoidable and reduced to 3%. Can you just explain your thinking behind those figures, please, and sort of justification for them?
Eric, I was just going to say we've got updated agendas here that will have a different page number if you want a copy.
My understanding is that in terms of pay inflation, we were looking at 5%, but then we were probably talking about coming down to 2 or 3%. Perhaps Tina Stank is in a better position to answer that than I am. Now I grasp where you are.
Yes, I think the thinking behind it was that we'd got a large increase in this year, larger than expected, and had been budgeted for last year, and that we might see pay rises levelling off into the next year or two. So we've brought that down to the 2% level in the medium-term financial strategy, and as well unavoidable increases in things such as contract costs, supplies and services costs, that things might settle down in terms of inflation rates again in those areas. We've recently seen, fuel prices starting to drop, and hopefully that will feed through the rest of the price increases that we've had on our food and other bills. And that's why it's been reduced back down. It is a long-term forecast, and we do take advice from our Treasury Management advisors in terms of the economic outlook. And that's why we have brought those inflation rates down again, and hopefully they'll materialise.
Just to follow up on that, do you think that, bearing in mind the 6% that we've seen in the 22-23, and bearing in mind that the public sector is said to be lagging the private sector in terms of pay inflation, do you think that that 2% is still a robust and realistic figure?
I think because officers have had a larger than expected pay increase in this year, then they might, substantially revert back to what would be realistic, I think, for following years at the 2%, because it's 2% on what they've had this year. And I mean, that's what we've anticipated. It remains to be seen, I think, but we're thinking that pay rises won't be as high again going forwards.
You're right, it does remain to be seen, and it is a judgment call. And I only mention those two factors because I think they are relevant in terms of deciding whether that figure of 2% is going to be achievable or not, and the risks associated with it. And those two particular factors, I have to say, would be a concern to me, that they have not yet perhaps been factored in, and that must be a risk within the plan.
So I just have a follow-up question, if I may, on that. I mean,
Yes.
Have you modelled what it would be, for example, if it were 5% or higher, or a range higher than 2%?
I don't think we have at the moment, but we could do.
Given what you just we both inferred there, and we've obviously, Mr. Chairman, come from the same angle, and that seems to be a prudent piece of work to be done, because I think you've got a huge risk in the medium financial plan with that figure.
I think that would be helpful if we were to do something along those lines. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think I had the same point highlighted in my notes as well. So I think it would be useful, that would have been one of my questions, that we could actually see what the difference would be if it was 4 or 5%. So that would be useful information to have, so that we can understand. I think we need to understand what officers are up against, which is laid out in the report. We're not going about stuff till last minute, till 26, 27. And actually, I was surprised not to see an increase in the budget for energy for crystal balls, because, they need them to try and, so I think, we need to be fair that they've taken advice, and that is suggested, but I think many of us would like to know what would be the effect if it was higher. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. Yes, I think there is little point in fooling ourselves, deluding ourselves into a situation that's not going to be deliverable. And I do believe that we need to look outside of that, particularly in those higher figures, and what we might need to do in terms of how we deal with that, because ultimately the gap has to be filled by some manner or means, and the longer notice you have of that, the more chance you have of ever meeting that. So I too have the same kind of concern with regard to other expenditure, and what we're actually seeing at the moment, and how long it will take before that dampens down. And of course, what we should remember is that inflation is only a reflection of the rate of increases. What we're not going to see, or what we haven't got reflected here, is where we've already accommodated the inflation that we've seen in and are having experienced at the present. But are we going to see the price settle back down to where it was previously? And I suspect there are many who will not expect that to happen. Let's hope it does, but I think there will only be certain commodities where that might happen, but I don't think that that's likely to be across the board. And that's one of those risks that I think we do have to be mindful of. So, right, any further questions? Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Seward, for this. So I've just had a question around the retained business rates. And you mentioned we needed to take 900,000 from the business rate reserve. So first question is, can the business rate reserve cope with that? And secondly, just going forward, obviously we're predicting, as far as we can, 7.2, 7.3 million pounds coming in from retained business rates in the future. So the nervousness would be around if it's settled at 6.3 million, and how we cope with that going forward. But I do appreciate that's fluctuating, and we don't know. So I suppose the easier question to answer is, can it cope this year with that £900,000 transfer?
Yeah, sorry, I confused the committee a bit because I talked about budget more than I talked about the medium-term financial strategy. So your question relates both looking forward and also to 23-24.
Yeah, it's what we're doing now this year, but the same issue going forward.
Yes, it is for a while. Tina's is at a better place than I am to explain what drives this. The business rate reserve at the moment, going into April 23, stands at, looking at the figure, 3.9 million. We're taking 868,000 out of it already, so we're now down to about 3 million. So we have to take another 900,000 from that. So that still leaves 2 million, and therefore we should be in a position where in 24-25 we shouldn't need to go there. If we need to go there in 25-26, and by that time there might be a new formula for local government funding, there is still 2 million sitting there to enable us to do that. So my view at the moment is that I'm fairly confident that I don't like taking reserves all the time, that we've got the buffer there to deal with fluctuations in the retained business rate. But Tina, you might like to add to that.
Yes, the business rates reserve is to cope with it's a smoothing effect, because the way in which business rates works is that you feel the effects of 1 year over 2 or 3 years. So the income that you get in 1 year, you may not get the benefit of it until the following year. Just looking at some figures here for 22-23, the total collection from payment to the general fund is only 4.8, but with all the adjustments, 4.8 million, with all the adjustments that we make, it calculates that the business rates retention received in the year is at 7.3, because you've got the impact of previous years. We're still feeling the effects of the COVID grants and loss of income. And the same goes for 23-24. The payment to the general fund is 9.5, but we received the 6.3, which is why we need to take some money from the reserve. So if we, in years where we have more than we anticipate, we would put it into that reserve, and that's why we need to take some out in 23-24. Going on to 24-25, the collection fund payment to the general fund is just over 10 million, and we will have retained business rates after all the adjustments that we put through for previous years of 7.4, nearly 7.376 million. So it is a smoothing mechanism, the use of the reserve, really, rather than necessarily a reserve that we're taking money from, and should be thinking whether we've got enough in there. It should even out a bit more once we've got through all the impacts of COVID as well, and that's sort of come out of the calculation.
Any other questions? Can I then just query at paragraph 3.7? Well, in fact, I'll go to 4.1 first. In the midst of that, it says, and I think we would understand why it would say this. It says that the medium-term financial strategy carries a higher level of risk than there might have been in previous years, and that's, I think, what we're talking about. So going to 3.7, you've said that in order to set a balanced budget in future years, the council will have to look at every option open to it, and that should include, and you've got 6 bullet points there. My question really is this: is given the lag and the timescale that is attached to most of those that are in that list, how realistic is it, do you think, that those items would enable us to close the gap without us doing some work, perhaps today onwards, in preparation for that?
Well, we did have I did have a discussion with Tina Sankner yesterday about that. It's a balance trying to work out, is there how big the risk is. You need to actually start doing a lot of work early, and using officer time, and then you don't want to be in a position where you find you don't need it, or like the situation we were faced with this year. We got started later than ideally we would have liked, and therefore it's become a rather quicker process than is perhaps it ought to have been, as a result of the financial situation that we have. The intention is that we will start earlier in 23-24, looking at those items that are in 3.7, so that we've got some contingency plans should we run into very rough waters, which I think is what the question you were saying was alluding to. So I do think we need to start earlier, but there's always this balance between how much you do on this, and then is it ultimately needed or is it not? I think the biggest challenge for us going forward is that after the next general election, I think whatever the colour of the government, it will actually get round to looking at local government finance and reviewing the formula. And what's going to come out of that, I think, is going to be, for a district authority like ours, probably a more significant challenge and a greater sense of uncertainty. So I think that's probably the biggest one we've got, but there might be other things that suddenly loom that we just don't know about at the moment. So yes, we will start earlier, and that's what Tina Stanley confirmed to me yesterday.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I just I guess I go back a few years ago, and let's say 2 years ago, when you were addressing us, I think that you had the comfort, probably the comfort zone ahead of you, and you weren't talking storm clouds in those days. But last year you very clearly were, and I think we all recognise that those storm clouds are pretty much overhead, and we might just see some significant impact from them and have to deal with those. And so I take your point that you don't want to be doing work that you're not going to need. But the whole point about contingency planning is that you form a view about the risk and the value of putting effort into doing that preparatory work into contingency planning. And so should those storm clouds prove to be troublesome, you then have work that you've already done that you can call off at relatively short notice and implement to plug those gaps. And that's, I think, where we are this time versus where we were a couple of years ago. It'll be for this committee to make up its mind with regard to where that level of risk sits, and ultimately full council will have to do the same. But I would suggest that there are reasons why you would take a different view or should be looking at a different set of circumstances than we had a couple of years ago. And I think that drives you towards that list that you've got there in 3.7, and how much time and how much work would you need to do to realistically give yourself some gap filling scope.
I would agree with you, Chairman.
So I think that's probably where I sit, and we'll find out whether the committee has a similar view on that, and that may form a recommendation alongside the scoping of greater percentages for pay and other materials and so on and so forth, other costs for us. Councillor Toy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree what's been said. We do need to look forward. The fact that we've acknowledged that we will need to is a start as well, and the conversations have clearly already started. I think we need to acknowledge that we do have this one team approach, as is written in the introduction to this item at 216, and therefore it's incumbent on all of us, officers and members, to continuously look at those items as we go through. So I think that should be a part of a standard process, and maybe in there then officers, helping us, we will find, if you like, the big ticket items that we may need to draw down. But it needs to be a continuous process, which I think has already begun. But I agree, it's something that we need to keep in everybody's mind. So I just wanted to reinforce that, but accept that we already have a system in place that should be working towards that with the one team. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, what you describe is not a new situation. Over the past decade or so, this organisation has had to do similar exercises, and it has been joint working between officers and members, and work streams have been identified, and work streams have delivered significant savings and significant efficiencies over the years for all sorts of reasons, not just because of budgetary pressures, but because of the way in which we work has to change with the passage of time. So I think all of that, the model is there. It just that we need, I think, to get that ball rolling, and I think we have good reason, because the risks are probably mounting at a much higher level, and the scope to deal with those challenges is running out, and I think that's the top and bottom of it, really. Any further questions? No. Okay, well, I think on the basis of the discussions that we've had so far, we've got a recommendation here which says that we review and consider the current financial projections for the period through to 26-27 and make recommendations to the cabinet where necessary. 2 points of, I think, been reasonably raised. One is that we should do some remodeling on the basis of higher percentages with regard to pay and other materials and commodities that we need to factor in, so that we've got, if you like, different scenarios that we can look at and take them forward. And the other one is with regard to doing some work with regard to contingency plans that we might be able to put into place at an earlier time than we might otherwise be. So they're the two that I've got. Have you anything else from the floor? Councillor Penfold.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman, to come in right at the end there. I was just on that point about the pay inflation because I'm slightly confused. Just coming back to 3.2, we looked at, we're talking about pay inflation has been included at 2% going forward. So that would be for 23-24. Am I right there? Yeah,
No,
no.
because if you look at the budget paper, paragraph 2.5, the assumed percentage increase for the pay award included for 23-24 is 5%.
Thank you. That I was going to refer to that paragraph. So that was just where my
But-
confusion was coming from.
What the 151 officer has advised the committee this morning is that then for future years after that, it's back down to 2-3%.
Okay. So that would be 24-25 onwards.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think there's a number of scenarios, number of models that one could construct. And it would be a matter of judgment about how far you go down that road. But I think we do need to have those available in order to get a better picture of what might be ahead of us. So with those two additional points to our recommendations, does anybody have anything else that would wish to see added? Can I have a proposer that we go along with the recommendation plus those two additional matters? Do I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Troy? Councillor Brathwaite? Can I have a show of hands then? Would we accept the recommendation that's written there plus those two then, please? That looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. Right. So moving on then to item 12. Well, Councillor Seward, I won't expect very much from you because you've already covered some of that. What I would say is I'm mindful that there are, 3 weeks between now, at least between now and when we sit to consider this at full council. So I think it's already written in here what we've got before us today may not be what we see on the 22nd. So I wonder if there's anything that you would want to say in that respect about anything that might be work in progress at the moment that might emerge on the 22nd that we don't have sight of today.
At the moment, no. Tim Adams did say to me the other day, this is a somewhat dull budget, given where we were. I think it's been sorting out where we've got to for now is where our minds have been. Whether there will be further changes or not, I have to say at this stage, it's not something which myself or colleagues have actually discussed. We'll just have to, I mean, if there are going to be changes or etc., well then once we've formulated a view over that, then we can let people know. But that's what you've got in front of you is where our minds are as of today. I'm sorry, I mean, there is this NNDR1 form, which is quite complex, but it's whether or not what we think we can take out of the collection fund or business rates. We've estimated it correctly when we didn't have a council tax increase 2 years ago. That's why it came in quite late, because we don't know that until sometime in February. The indications I have at the moment is that we've probably got our estimates about right. So we'll just have to see how we go.
Okay, thank you. Also, thank you.
In terms of that there may be changes, if there are any changes, we'll incorporate them into the cabinet report if they are known about before then. But it's things such as the confirmation of the provisional local government settlement, if we have that in a timely manner, and if anything comes to light in terms of a service manager looks at their budgets in the next week or so and and finds that they need to change them, or you know, something comes to light. It won't be anything major. I'm looking at tweaks rather than any, you know, whole scale changes at all in figures. It's just finalising them really if something comes to light.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. All right. So before I open up for questions, if you don't wish to add anything to what you've already said, Councillor Seawood, can I just ask you which part, if any, of the budget you see as the cause of greatest risk, or to put it another way, if it affects your lifestyle in this way, which part of it causes you to lose sleep at night?
Staff cost inflation. That was a figure that when I first saw it, leapt out at me. This does also talk about the capital programme. I think the other thing that frightens me as much, if not more, is the rising cost of capital projects. If it's based on a budget that was set around 2019, 2020, then what we're now getting is, in some cases, double. Also, what is occurring, as we're finding at the moment, is when we go out to tender for contracts, we often only get one, possibly two at the most. So there's not a lot of competition out there to drive things down, and this council's already aware of some projects. I mean, I do feel for councillors from Fakenham about the rising cost of the the actual roundabout down there. It's gone up from 1.8 to nearly 3 million. That is not untypical of what we've found elsewhere. So I think if something gives me more sleepless nights than anything else going forward, is these rising capital costs. And I just hope that they start to stabilise, because I can't see how this council or any other council's capital budgets can manage what they want and would like to do unless we can actually get these costs stabilised.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for your candour on that. Right. Questions then? Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 64, 2.1, the tax base of 41,000. Is anybody able to tell me how that tax base has changed over time? Because effectively, every time there's a holiday home that comes off of the tax base and goes on to business rates, if I understand this correctly, our tax base has gone down. It's one less house contributing. So I'd like to know the effect of holiday homes. Now we can't, I know they're not all registered, but if we look at the tax base, we know by the number of houses that are paying. So if there are, 50,000 houses, 41 are paying, we know that 9,000 are possibly in that bracket, but that's 9,000 houses that we've lost income from. And then, of course, that kind of, I'd like to understand that, because I think it's on the sheets where we talk about potential stuff for the doubling of council tax, which was something we took through the council here. So that's on, I think, page sheet 8 of 9. And I just wondered how the two tied up as well. So I don't know if anybody can answer that, how the tax base was in previous years or how it shifted. It may be something that you'll need to come back on me on, but I'm interested to see what effect that's having on our budget, because if we're losing significant number of houses to holiday homes, then that is income we've lost because we don't get the tax because they go on business rate relief. So
just to be clear, I think you are referring to those houses that have become holiday homes, and that they are not on business rates, but they are on Oh, sorry, they're on business.
They're on
rates.
business
Yes,
rates,
they're on
but then they get
rates.
business rate relief
Yes,
because they're a small
yes,
business.
yes, that's right.
It's something I've seen. I've got 9 parishes, Mr. Chairman, and as I've seen, I look at their tax base because each individual in that village is paying council tax. The amount they have to pay to maintain the amount of precept goes up each time a holiday house
Yes. In order to
Those-
stay still.
becomes, yeah. So I'd like to understand, having raised the second homes, holiday homes question, which this council's been through, I'd like to know what effect that's having in terms of our budget. But I don't expect officers or members to have that answer here.
No.
But I'd like to just raise that point.
Okay, it does sound like a fairly complex subject. Don't know if there's a simple answer to it.
Well, I think if I could just, if we could find how the tax base has shifted, which just tells us the number of houses paying tax, then I have a starting point if we need to go for a further question. It may not have changed.
Okay.
So, but that's something that hopefully we will have in our records somewhere that can tell us what the tax base was 2, 3, 5 years ago. So, thank you.
Councillor Stanley.
Yes, I can go back 5 years and have a look at that for you and let members have the information. Yeah.
That we can then see its effect on the budget, if any, and I need to be open about that, but it also then gives us an indication how that fits with if these houses were then suddenly paying double and we were able to retain it. That to me would balance the two up. But thank you.
Okay, so would it be, I think, right to describe that to come back to us at some stage with a review of the tax base? And in particular, in respect of the movement of properties to holiday homes and the implications that flow from that.
Because second homes are different, that they would
Yes.
still pay. It's the
Yes.
holiday homes that we're trying
Yes.
to identify.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Bratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak. I would expect that perhaps some work has been done on this already, because we did have a paper come to overview and scrutiny on the effect of second homes and holiday lets on our local economy. So I would expect that some research has already been done along these lines to enable that paper to be brought forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you may be right. I think the substance of the paper that came to us would have included some of that information. How comprehensive that is, you will no doubt find out in due course on how much work might need to be done to update that, because it's a little while ago and there may well be changes that will have taken place in the meantime. So thank you for that. Questions?
If it could help the committee chairman, I know Sean Knight has all these figures because he's given me some very recently. My problem just at the moment is trying to find where I put them.
Okay,
But Sean Knight does have these figures.
all right, thank you. Councillor Withington.
Thank you, Chair. Relating to that, I'm wondering as well whether, because obviously we're going to be looking forward as well, is whether we are bringing forward fewer houses as a result of nutrient neutrality, which we could impact as well on the tax base as well, because I think it's difficult to see. I remember the discussions when we were doing the review. It's difficult to see sometimes what the changes as a result of second homes, because we've also got a lot of new houses coming on as well, producing, new taxpayers. So I think that's probably worth a little look at as well.
Thank you. I'm sure you're right. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask a question, please, about Appendix A, which looks at the proposed savings and the income, and ask Officer Stankley if we could be sent a copy of that sheet, but filtered by savings and income, so they're both split out. It's all blended together at the moment, and it would be helpful just, I think, to see the split between the two. I think it'd also be helpful for us to have an indication of what level of confidence you have against each of those items on there, whether you think they're effectively very likely to be achieved, or whether there's considerable doubt whether they will be achieved. If that was, Officer Stankley is able to do that for us.
Yes, I can do that for you. In terms of the savings, we are actually taking those out of the budget if members approve them. So we're confident that they will be achieved. The income is, yes, we can look at the degree of confidence in the projections here for the increases.
Right, okay, so all this, so you're saying all the savings you think are actually done and effectively will be done and dusted, they'll be okay.
Yes, we can take those if once approved by members, yes.
Okay, I still appreciate we have that split.
Yeah.
In terms of.
Mhm.
Just to follow on with that, Councillor Seawood, you mentioned paragraph 2.3 and the initial expectations with regard to identified savings, and we were looking at 396 at that particular stage, and that got overtaken by events. And in the appendix that Councillor Cushing refers to, I kind of lost track and couldn't identify what the split was where you've got your totals at the end of that appendix. I couldn't, and I may have missed it, but I couldn't identify what the revised savings figure was and what the income figure was, because I think they are combined into the totals at the bottom, and I'm looking at page 71 of my papers.
Yes, I'm on the same page, Chair. You're right, the total figure there of 1,216,000
Yes.
is the total figure for savings and income. There is a column which has S and I against it, which identifies whether it's a saving or an increase in income.
Yes.
But on the basis of Christopher Cushing's question, it is a perfectly legitimate thing, in my view, that you should know, or members should know, how much is savings and how much is income.
Yes.
And rather than having to go through this chart and then rework it out so that we're quite clear. But as the 151 officer has said, those savings and income increases, we are confident, if they are approved by members later in February, that they are achievable.
That's fine, I think, but I think what we would like, certainly what I would like, is to have an idea of what that total is, because it will tell me a number of things really, but it will certainly tell me how far we had to move from the 396 to where we are, and that might actually include some views on confidence levels, if you like, of being able to deliver all of those, because there will be challenges in there. And this won't be the first council that we will have seen where they will have identified a number of savings, which it's all very well to compile a list, but to actually deliver them, particularly in the face of those things, as we were saying, we don't know what's coming down the road, and we don't know how easy it is going to be to deliver them. So I think it's as well to have a view on the risk that might be associated with them. Officer Stankley.
Yes, if I could. It's perhaps not explained very well, and I need to have a look at the wording perhaps. But in paragraph 2.3, where we refer into savings of 396,000, these were the savings identified when we looked at the budget initially, offered up by service managers, for example, in environmental health, where they'd offered up savings. And I've given there an example of some of the savings that were identified. So they have been taken out of the budget.
Mm-hmm.
And then the appendix, which has the savings and the income, those as well are included in the budget figures at the moment. But those are the ones that we're suggesting that members want to take a view on, give an opinion on, as to whether they think that they should be taken. So they have been taken at the moment. So budgets have been reduced by those savings, and the income has been added into income budgets. But if members were to say, well, we don't want to take one of them, we would add that back into the budget. And so that the 396 we're assuming has been taken, and the 1.2, which is the total of all the savings in that appendix and all the income in that appendix, they're for members to decide whether they actually want those to go forward, in which case they would be added back in, and that would result in needing to identify a withdrawal from reserve somewhere to balance the budget again.
So just to clarify, as the balanced budget stand at the moment,
Yes, yeah,
is that balanced budget dependent on achieving both the savings that are in this Appendix A and the income?
yes,
So in other words, they are factored into the balanced budget. And if we take anything out of that, then we have got to find a means of closing that gap.
yes, we have, yes.
Okay. Okay, I understood it, yes. Councillor Rest.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me speak. Just can I move on to Appendix B, please? Page 79. Just for confirmation, in the subtotal there of service, can I just confirm, it says registration services. Could the officer tell me, is that correct, that the difference there is actually nearly 39% in registration services on the budget?
I think that I believe that reflects the 4-yearly cycle in the elections, in that we obviously there is 3 years when we don't have district council elections, and so the budget for those years is lower. And then there's a £50,000 placed into the elections reserve. Otherwise, in the 4th year, we have to fund that amount of money, but the actual expenditure in that year will be higher than the 3 years that follow. So it's a provision that we've made, because for these local government elections in May 2023, the full cost of those are met by this authority. Whereas for any parliamentary elections, county council elections, police and crime commissioner elections, we are funded or refunded by a third party. So I believe that that figure is higher in 23-24 for that reason.
Okay. Councillor Heinrich.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Just looking with some regret at the reduction in the Sustainable Communities funding. I understand why it's necessary, but just to express a hope that it could be reinstated to its former level in 24 onwards. I mean, a lot of our smaller settlements do depend on that for maintenance of village halls and the like. Thank you.
Mr. Blatch.
So the Sustainable Communities Fund was previously financed through a refund from the second home council tax money that was passed to Norfolk County Council. That was secured through previous administrations because of the pressure on county council budgets. Notice was given to us 2 or 3 years ago that arrangement would end. And so this authority has continued to make provision into that budget. Given the financial situation that we now face, it's not felt that we can do that on a sustainable basis moving forward. Over the same time period, there have been significant community funds announced by offshore wind companies, and the authority needs to promote those to town and parish councils and community organisations. And I did email a number of local members earlier this week in respect of the Orsted Hornsea Project 3 Community Fund at £700,000 per annum. And I think we need to encourage our communities to avail themselves of those opportunities, because the ability for us to fund that grant scheme moving forward must be in question in terms of our statutory responsibilities and what is a discretionary fund. But that's the context of that fund in the recent past.
Well, you just come back a moment. Yes, thanks. I understood all the reasons. In that case, are we going to ensure that people who would otherwise apply for the Sustainable Communities Fund are fully aware of the other opportunities for funding? You know, obviously
I think we are doing that. I think we could always do more, but I think that communication is important in terms of the impact and potential those funds represent to many communities in North Norfolk.
I think it's recognised that there is a challenge that even when we promote the Sustainable Communities Fund, there are a lot of parishes that don't seem to recognise that opportunity and use it. I think the challenge will be even more if that is then dispersed around a whole number of other opportunities, because that will be a more difficult message. And we've got the chairman here of the Sustainable Communities Fund. He may disagree with what I've said, but from what I see happening, there are those that have not really had the benefit of the fund, and that may be down to either them not knowing about it or for one reason or other not engaging with it.
I think there are a number of reasons. Yeah, absolutely. As to why certain areas seem to make more applications than others, and that might be something to do with promotion of the fund by members. It might be something to do with members on the panel being more active in promoting the fund in their wards. But we have discussed this as a panel already, the pressure on the budget, and I think it's a conversation that we are having, and we will have, and we will do our best to try to find ways. And it's a conversation I need to have with officers, I think, about how we can keep that fund alive, because it does do some excellent work, and many communities have benefited from it. So going forward, yeah, whether we have conversations with, for example, some of the offshore wind companies, and we together with them fund projects, or we distribute on their behalf, or whatever it might be, or they give us a grant to do that. There are different ways, different models we've looked at. So I would, for one, fight very hard to keep that fund alive.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Seawood.
Yes, I mean, in the appendix, it's at 125,000. There is just two things I'd like to draw to the committee's attention. In the reserve statement, the sums for these grants have come from the community's reserve. What we're now coming to after a number of years of doing it is that fund is now being whittled down, and it's really only got funding for another year. So in the reserve statement that's before you, it is a movement out of 275,000, which is the budget for the community's grants. But there are also, when we discuss this, some other sources within the council's funding streams that we could bring it back to 275. So whilst that's 125, both within the reserve and also other funding sources, there's potential to maintain the level in 23-24 that is being maintained, that we have this year. But what I do have to say is that after 23-24, there isn't a reserve there. And if you spend all the money next year, then you've got a real challenge about finding it in 24, 25, 25, 26. But that's the position. But as members have said, it is a grant scheme which, whilst some parishes have used it extensively, others haven't. It's not always been fully spent. Nevertheless, it's produced some very valuable outcomes, and somehow we have to continue with it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is just obviously one particular line. I'm sure there will be other lines that members will also have a view about, and they will have to go into the mix in the end, and we can only spend the money once. Right, okay. Any other questions in relation to the draft budget? No? Okay. Well,
Chairman, I'll just note from a governance perspective that we might want to amend that second recommendation to state that members note the proposed budget and recommend it to council for approval if the committee are minded to do so.
yeah, right, okay, and recommend to full council. Okay, I think there's one clarification I think that we were looking for, and I think Officer Stankley, you indicated that you'd be able to provide that, and that was clarification between the savings and the income, so that we're clearer about Appendix A. So subject to that, the two recommendations that we have before us, put forward the recommendation to Cabinet for its consideration at meeting on the 6th of February, and that members note the proposed draft budget for 23-24 and recommend it to full council. So they are the two recommendations. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? I've got Councillor Heinrich and Councillor Penfold. Can I have a show of hands then to approve that, please? Thank you. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you. Right. Turning to item 13, capital strategy for 23-24. Councillor Seawood.
This is a required report, as you know, Chairman. There's very little comment I can make on this other than to say that to date we have not gone into long-term borrowing to fund the capital programme. We haven't again this year. The advice that we've received from our financial advisors is that with the higher rates of interest, we should not, unless we absolutely have to, be funding our capital programme in 23-24 by long-term borrowing. We should, if we have to do this, we should wait until interest rates come down. So, but apart from that, and I think it's rightly described that my candor about my sleepless nights over the capital funding, there's nothing more I wish to add.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think you raise a very good point with regard to, if you like, the sustainability and stability of the capital strategy and how we fund things in the future and our reliance or otherwise on long-term debt. And that balance between what we have invested and what we borrow long-term becomes quite crucial. Thank you for that. Questions then to Councillor Seawood. Okay, I think that that's probably fairly self-explanatory, and other than that, keeping you awake at night in some regards, I think we would understand that. So the recommendation is that Cabinet recommends to full council that the capital strategy and potential indicators for 23-24 are approved. Can I have a proposer and a second to them, please? Councillor Blathwaite and Councillor Toy. Can I have a show of hands then, please? That looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much. To item 14. And item 14 is the investment strategy for 23-24. Councillor Seawood.
I have nothing further to add on that other than the recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Clearly there are no questions. So the recommendation is that Council be asked to resolve that the investment strategy is approved. Can I have a proposer and a seconder then, please? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Withington. Can I have a show of hands then, please? That looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much. Item 15 is the Treasury Management Strategy for 23-24. My, we're heavily into financial matters today, aren't we?
I think this is my last report. Yes, I mean, you've got the recommendations. The only thing I would like to draw to the committee's attention is really set out in the borrowing strategy on page 125. A change in emphasis is now taking place. For many years, in order to ensure we always have sufficient cash in the bank to transfer to the county or the police authority in terms of council tax precepts and so on, pay for large capital projects. we have borrowed money from a cash flow point of view on a short-term basis, and those interest rates have been very low, around 0.5% less sometimes. They have now gone up considerably, and we are now having to pay more for short-term borrowing than we're actually getting on average from our investment income. So in the light of that, I did agree with Tina Stankley before Christmas that we're probably better off if we've got some low yielding investments to actually sell those to boost our cash reserves rather than engage in short-term borrowing because it was cheaper. And that's what we're now proposing to do. But in terms of the interest that we will get from our investments with the rising interest rates, we will still be getting more in 23-24 than we have in 22-23. So other than that, I've no further comment to make, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Seawood. So you anticipate a sort of change of strategy in that respect?
Yes.
Okay. Questions? For Councillor Seawood? No? Okay. I think again, that's fairly self-explanatory. So the recommendation then is to recommend that the council be asked to resolve that the treasury management strategy is approved. Can I have a proposer and a seconder there, please? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Fisher. Show of hands then, please. All in favour? Thank you. That looks unanimous. So turning then to item 16. Item 16 is the Sheringham Reef Leisure Centre project review. Councillor Gay, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to introduce this item to you this morning. The project review which you have before you is an exercise in reflective practice. You're asked to note the report and especially the table of lessons which is attached to it. I should tell you right now that it's the culmination of hours of interviews and careful study of many documents, and I would like to record my thanks to Erica Temple and to Linda McEllicott for the way in which they've accomplished this work. Thank you. This review seeks to consider how well our reef project has addressed the three constraints which all projects share, which is essentially time, money, and purpose. And if you were to retrace the accounts of this project, which have been given to this committee over the years, Chairman, you'd find that the second phase of the construction work was originally planned to conclude in November of 2021. In the event, the reef did open at the end of November 2021, despite losing weeks to COVID in the spring of 2020. As for money, yes, the review demonstrates that there was a slippage, but I don't think that is a surprise to anyone in this committee. It was foreseen, accounted for, and notified to the committee as early as January 2021. The financial analysis presented in July of that year shows the budget variations and pattern of expenditure over the life of the project. So that was reported to the committee, as you will remember. So, and in the end, then, despite all original expectations, this facility was built without recourse to long-term borrowing. And that was not what had been expected in the beginning. But the last of these, the sense of purpose, I just wanted to say the new leisure centre was expected to serve the health and well-being of our residents and our visitors. That was its purpose. And to me, it's this above all that is the measure of the project's success. Just briefly, the review states that membership is far higher than the figure envisioned at the feasibility stage. In fact, membership has tripled since the closure of Splash. The facility, the reef is as accessible as it was possible to make it. It's welcoming to people of all ages and physical disabilities. It has changing places facilities within it. And Emma kindly advised on that, sitting next to me. Once upon a time, 2 local schools had their swimming lessons at the Splash. That figure is now 9. There are 9 schools there. So it's doing everything that we hoped it would do. As I'm finishing here, I just want to recommend the table of lessons learned to you. This is, I think, a very insightful piece of work. While these do apply to this leisure project, I think that many of them would seem to apply to almost any project in almost any council. Continuity in long projects, especially within organisations which are subject to elections, is a fraught issue. And this receives attention in lessons learned. And I think, Chairman, at the beginning of any project, you should draw together people beyond the reach of the project's natural supporters. So you bring to bear every expertise that you have from the beginning and involve any group which can bring that to bear. But again, that's generic advice. I think that's good advice in any project. Record keeping is vital. That's one of the lessons learned. I think we'd agree on all of these things. It's doing them which is hard. Anyway, that's all I have to say at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gay. I think it's just worth adding in context that this is a project that has spanned 2 different political administrations.
3 perhaps, because there was a period of no overall control.
Indeed.
It's the benefit of numeracy lessons,
So-
Mr. Chairman.
So for it to have survived and been delivered in the context of that is, I think, probably a commendable point in itself. And we shouldn't forget that that period of time is measured in several years. We're nearly at the end of this administration, and so I guess in terms of timescale, we probably are looking at the better part of 8 years from when that was first planned to its delivery. Although, to be fair, of course, it was opened in November of last year, November. Yes, that's right. And so it's probably a little shorter than we might initially think. And that brings me to the next point, actually, and that is that this report, when we asked for it to cover the delivery of the project, planning right the way through to its opening. And I'm sure there are many points that members might want to raise in regard to how it's been doing since. And you mentioned one of them, i.e. the membership has been tripled, but there are other things as well, which I'm sure members might have an interest in. And there is always the opportunity, if we want further information, to find out, for example, how it's doing on energy efficiency and things of that sort, then we can commission a further report should we feel that that would be helpful to us. So, and the other thing I would say is I commend the report on its conciseness. It seems to hit the key points. And there are not many reports that we get, I have to say, for this committee that comprises of only a few pages, and I commend the team for being concise in that way. I think that's all I really want to say in terms of context as I see it. It undoubtedly is a success, having seen how it went through its conception and planning and then the delivery. And the fact that there was that degree of slippage, I don't think is significant in the context of the overall sum. And I think I would probably defy any organisations to be able to plan and deliver over that timescale with that kind of slippage. And this committee actually had the benefit of various updates over the passage of time. Certainly during my time in this role, we've seen this brought to us a number of times. And we've made recommendations, and one particular recommendation I remember was particularly significant, and that was the phasing of the demolition of the old splash, and basically taking into account those things where COVID had intruded in particular, had an impact on us. So I see that as a good example, if you like, of being able to work well in overseeing and scrutinizing the project and have the opportunity to influence where it's appropriate. So thank you for that. I've said enough, if not more than enough. I'll open it to questions. Councillor Cushing, Councillor Penfold, Councillor Brown. Councillor Cushing.
Yes, I saw it ready. It was a very quick one now. I'd like to thank Officer Gay for her update. I noticed we've got a number of project recommendations, which obviously you mentioned. I was just going to make a recommendation that we send those to the Group Risk and Audit Committee, given that it has oversight of project management portfolio. Sorry, John, but I think it's probably useful to come and have a look at those as well in that context. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's an affirmative, is it, from the chair of the? Thank you. Good. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Erica, and for the report and its brevity. It's much appreciated. I do agree that 100,000 slippage on a 12.7 million project is minimal and very impressive indeed that it was kept to that very minimal level. It's clearly a superb facility, and that's evidenced through the feedback we have and the increase in usage. I've enjoyed swimming there. The family have as well. Yes. So it's really very, very, very impressive. Just a couple of questions on the lessons learnt and the reverse side of that. So I think it's on page 154 for me. I'm not quite sure whether all our pages are matching. So it's on the flip side. So just looking at when we're talking around a perception that the final stages of the build were rushed and that finishes were unacceptable through the subcontractors, and that the contractor signed those things off before they were ready. In my experience, it's always the architect that signs off on building work, and the architect only signs that off when they are happy that the contractor has carried out the contract satisfactorily, and there's a retention sum and all the rest of it. So what was the role of the architect there in terms of signing off those stages of work? And just thinking more broadly and above that, would it have been worth thinking about external evaluation on this? We seem to have sort of evaluated it ourselves, and I'm just wondering whether actually to have somebody looking at that from without the organisation may have been beneficial. Thank you.
Okay.
First of all, thank you. It is my understanding that there was a final going through from someone who was not within our organisation, from that someone was paid to do this, or that is my understanding. So yes, that stage did happen. The other thing here is, the key word here is perception. There were interviews, and this is people looking back and saying how they thought things might have occurred. In my memory, there was a general perception that things were not proceeding as efficiently as they might have done. And obviously this seems to have been revealed through the interviews that were done. I can't comment on what the contractor did or did not check at what time, because obviously I wasn't involved in the operational side of this. I don't know if officers can cast any light on that, or if I should perhaps pursue this and get back to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Because I think it's not usual for a contractor to sign off their own work. That there obviously are clear issues there with allowing someone to do that. So that's the role, really, it seems to me, of the architect in a project, in order that work is satisfactory. So it would be useful just to know that, and going forward, perhaps that we need to think about that. What can I just also ask then, going forward in terms of evaluation, is that left to the management company now to seek user feedback and to feed that back to us? Thank you.
That's okay.
I don't know what the process is at the moment. I don't know what the process is at the moment. There are regular reports which come back from everyone active, and there is a regular meeting with everyone active. And perhaps this would be a good point at which to refer to energy efficiency, because questions have been asked in this chamber about energy efficiency. Everyone active is studying this, but they haven't been operating the equipment themselves according to their own protocols long enough to have a year's data to report back on this. So what I do know is that there are regular meetings, that EA does report back on the operation of the facility.
Thank you. Just to pick up on that point with regard to the independent sign-off, hearing your reservations in respect to that, is it possible to confirm what that was? And I'm mindful that if it goes to BRAC, for example, that will be one of the factors that the BRAC would want to be satisfied on and would want to have further details about.
I think Mr. Blatch wants to speak to that question.
Mr. Blatch.
So I think in the final fitting stages, there were some decisions that were influenced by the availability of the supply of materials and components due to COVID. So there was a period of time, a matter of weeks, where there were conversations between what was originally proposed to be purchased and what was available and could be commissioned. It's my understanding that we were advised throughout by our consultants, and the project was required sign off before it could be commissioned by Sport England's advisor. So I think those authorities were obtained, but I think the feedback that Erica has received through the interviews was that there wasn't necessarily absolute clarity around those decisions at that time, but the project was appropriately signed off in respect of the grant funding and the financial approval.
So is it possible then to confirm what those arrangements were, so that when this matter does go to GRAC, there is absolute clarity around those? That would be, I think.
Yes,
helpful.
I believe we can provide clarity in that respect for the GRAC meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Does that cover?
Yes, thank you. I think I was just trying to understand the role of the architect in the whole thing as well. Having met the architect and enjoyed that conversation. So yeah, how that factored in. Thank you.
Okay. Just to do officers wish to respond to any other points that Councillor Penfold raised?
Thank you. Just with regards to that conversation, I think perception is a good word, that it very much was conversations that I was having. So therefore was a perception of others. So we'll definitely make sure that we get some further clarity on that. But to echo what Blatch has just said, it was very much the sort of finishing touches of certain works in the area that the belief was that they weren't signed off correctly and were very much rushed through. So that's what I was informed, but further detail we can arrange.
Okay, thank you. You content with that? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, once again for allowing me to speak. Obviously, it's useful to look at lessons learned from any project, but I just want to focus on what a tremendous success this project has been for this authority in very difficult circumstances. I'd like to thank the officers for their report, and particularly my cabinet colleague for overseeing the project generally. Other authorities are closing their leisure centres. We clearly haven't, but we think that this is obviously a value for money project, and as Councillor Penfold has said, £100,000 on 12.7 million is admirable. And I'd just like to say, thank goodness this was never subject to a levelling up bid.
I couldn't possibly comment on that.
I wouldn't expect you to, Mr. Chairman, in your position.
I guess one could say what's in a name, but I think there's rather more than that behind it. But anyway, thank you for that. So any other, Councillor Toy and Councillor Withington?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd reinforce everything everybody said about the positive story, and absolutely agree. Hello, and I've just lost my page. I just wondered, hopefully a short question, would there be, and maybe it's for Greg, I don't know, but a follow up with an action plan if there was any actions in there. So, for example, it often talks about levels of expertise. Do we have a register of people's expertise? So, are there any action plans to be followed on from that, having identified things that weren't right, how we're going to action that we can perhaps do it better, albeit it was done well. I don't want to sound critical, but if there are things there that we've learned by doing this, then is there an action plan to follow up from that? That's the question, really.
Thank you for that. I would expect that to be something which the GRAC would want to consider and come back to us at a later date. So I will leave that, I think, in the hands of GRAC. But you're right, we shouldn't leave it at this particular point. There are ways in which these can be progressed to a better conclusion. Right. Councillor Withington.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to reiterate what everyone has said about what a fantastic project this is and how well received it's been within Sheringham. I think those membership figures reflect that, but there's also, it came from quite a difficult place with the loss of our beloved splash and our flumes and our wave machine. So it had quite a lot to overcome in some ways. So, and I think it has done that on the whole. And it is a beautiful building, and it's certainly finding its place in our community, and everyone active are really rebuilding those relationships. So it's very positive in that respect, and obviously done without borrowing and all those things. So, a good example of a project done well. There's a couple of points I'd like to pick up from the review process. Looking at, it's page 154 on the new agenda, and it's the top section, no consistent point of contact for internal stakeholders with external stakeholders, etc. And it does point out that it was in the early involvement stage, and I would like to reiterate that. And I think that was one of the issues that created so many problems for bringing the project forward as a non-wave pool, so to speak, because I think it was it seemed to appear as a final decision. We all went to the splash and had a look, but that was a final decision. And I think that's something we really do need to learn from that, because we made ourselves a huge mountain to climb, which, we have overcome it. We have gone over the top and done well, but it might not have been the case. So I think that is something that we really do need to take on board as part of our work in any big projects we've got coming up. The technical knowledge, which John has picked up, I'm pretty amazed actually, because since I've been in council, we've had sandscaping going on, we've had this big project going on. Such a huge range of expertise required to do these projects, and to some extent, I'm not sure how, as a relatively small council, we can be expected to hold all that expertise for this range and variety of projects that we might have coming forward. So I think there is something to be looked at there, because I think there's potential for it. For a council that wants to do things and wants to serve its community well, there's the potential there for us to be held back if we haven't got a means to access that expertise. So I think it's really important that that's been raised. And my last issue, as Councillor Lloyd isn't here, I'm going to raise is I found it interesting in here that there's nothing reviewing the environmental side and the impact of the reef. And there are some real positives about that, and there are some positives coming forward now with the solar ports in the car park. So I think reviews can be positive as well, and I think it would have been interesting to have that, and I would hope in future reviews that we could possibly consider whether we have that as an essential item to be looked at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's the rest.
Thank you, Chairman. If it's not commercially sensitive, can I ask what else is happening to the rest of the site around the project, please?
I'll need to provide a written answer in that there's a planning application in for a hotel, a part hotel development, which is under appraisal. That is with the applicant is the company that the authority has had some long-standing discussions with, and I believe have reached provisional terms, but I don't know the exact status of that inquiry or the conveyance or intention to sell, so I'd need to come back to you.
Councillor Seward.
Yes, can I confirm what Steve Black says as the portfolio holder for the estates team? It's a regular item on the agenda. The position is essentially as Steve Black has outlined it. There is a provisional legal agreement to proceed. They have to get a planning application in by a certain time frame. That application is in, that is being considered. And then if that is approved, then there is a certain time scale then for the money to be paid and the works to start. So it's progressing.
I could just come back, as I'm not a member of the Overview and Scrutiny, can I suggest to Steve Blacks that the correspondence that is circulated to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee so that they're aware of it?
I'll ask for an update from the asset manager in terms of what is commercially sensitive or confidential, but I'll ask for a briefing note to be prepared.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Blathwaite.
Yeah, may I ask, sort of, it follows on from the previous answer. Is there any evidence of tourism, the tourist offer being seen by the North Norfolk coast in general? Has it improved the tourist offer, and are we seeing greater tourist numbers or feedback because of the splash?
I don't know whether there is, I don't know whether we have got that factual evidence, but we can say that there were more users in August of 2022 than there had been in any previous year. So in terms of use of the facility, there is strong and healthy level of use during the summer, notwithstanding that the summer was very positive last year in terms of the weather. I think people's expectations have possibly changed over time, and as Councillor Withington has said, they recognise the quality of that facility and that it is a swimming pool and leisure centre rather than a leisure pool in itself. But certainly the user numbers last August were the highest that everyone active had seen in an August.
Okay. Right, are we all done? Councillor Gade.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just tie up a few things here at the end. First of all, these recommendations will go back to the corporate delivery unit. Having a project review is part of proper project governance, as anyone who attended that audit will know. So these will definitely go back. Sustainability is addressed in section 8 of this paper in the sense of what was achieved within the building for sustainability. And as I explained earlier, the data doesn't exist yet for a complete understanding of the way in which energy is used within the building. But there have been many questions about that, and I'm quite sure that this will be done in due course, because it's something we need to know for the lifetime of the building. And I guess the last thing I would say is perhaps something on expertise. I think what this is meant to convey here is that perhaps at the outset of the project, you see what internal expertise you have got and you consult that. Obviously, as Councillor Withington pointed out, any council at our level is not going to have an expert employed for every problem which might arise. I think it's suggesting that at the outset, you make sure that you've consulted all the expertise which is at your disposal from the beginning. And I guess finally, we had hoped that this would be helpful in the project for a swimming pool at Fakenham. And unfortunately, that's not going to be the case, but it was hoped that some of these would have an immediate application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gay. Yes, I think from what I've heard, there are some topics that would benefit from further reporting on, and you've mentioned one of them, and others have been mentioned along the way. Certainly, how you actually describe them, and I guess sustainability, the word that you used, probably covers a number of those considerations. But certainly, energy efficiency, its financial performance. It's an environmental review, its success in terms of offerings or improving the coastal offering for tourism. And I guess there's one other matter which I think I was aware was outstanding, and that was final closure of the financial account for the project. Is that correct? Councillor Gay, can you shed any light on that?
What is the question?
Whether the final account for the reef has been closed. And my understanding was that there were a number of issues that were still under discussion between, I think, client and contractor in general terms. Is that still the case or not?
To Mr. Blatch.
She's able to, she's probably more in with the figures than I am.
We're still waiting for the final figure for the retention to be paid over. I would have to check on that and see what we think that might be, but that has not yet been settled.
Thank you, Tina. That has been a concern of mine. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, so there's a number of issues there that I think very much belong to the present and the future of the facility and how it's performing, and whether or not you would wish to see any individual reports on those topics, or whether you would want to see a composite report at some stage in the future. Any feelings from the floor, please?
I think a composite report would be fine. Personally, I don't want to give too much extra work here to officers. So, yeah, covering those topics.
Yes. Any other thoughts on that? I wouldn't, as you rightly say, I wouldn't want to make it burdensome, but I do believe there are some follow-up feedback report aspects that we ought to I think know of, and in some cases we may be able to celebrate. Or there may be further lessons to be learned. Couple of things regarding, we've mentioned action plans, and I think the other point that comes to my mind when we talk about the levels of expertise that we have within the organisation and how we deal with the project management. Could I say that that's possibly one of the things that maybe GRAC could look at in terms of because clearly project management or the delivery of the project has got various levels of supervision and management, and whether there are any lessons that needs to be learned in that regard. I think they're probably within the lessons learnt appendix by and large, but I think that general point of making sure that the organisation knows what skill sets it's got within its own staff and employs those appropriately, and then where it doesn't have those skills, it engages others to meet that demand. And where, you know, whether that was successful in this particular or whether there were lessons to be learned in that regard.
I'm sure Matt can look through our programme and find room for all your requests, Chairman. Happy to take them on for you, and we'll have to probably put something of our own out of the way, but we're more than happy to oblige with that for you.
We like to provide some stocking fillers.
Thank you so much.
Again.
You're so kind.
That's fine. Thank you for coming today. Right. Okay. So we are recommended to note the report, the lessons learnt, but there are, I think, some follow-ups there. We've mentioned the one to GRAC, and at some stage we would like to see a composite follow-up report which covers the points that we've raised today. It doesn't have to be in great detail, but I think it would help us understand the success or otherwise of a number of considerations to do with the project. So could I have a show of hands then? It's just a note. Could I have a show of hands to proceed on that basis? Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. Right. So we move then on to item 17. And that is the Cabinet Work Programme, I believe. Yes, 17 is the Cabinet Work Programme and the Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme and update.
Yeah, I would just note that obviously the committee has just reviewed a number of the reports that will be going to Cabinet and Council in February, essentially undertaking pre-scrutiny of all 6 budget reports. So that is a large part of what is going forward to Cabinet in next month. I will note, and this has been referred to just now with discussion of the Reef Project Review report, that in March, oh no, I think it's listed for February actually, there is the solar carport report expected with suggestion of what will happen to the Reef car park. That isn't currently listed for consideration by scrutiny, but perhaps that's something members would be interested in, given the conversations that we've had, certainly looking at, given that that's a key decision, the cost of that project, what the projected energy generation would be and what sort of impact that might have on the facility itself. So that's something to consider. Beyond that, on the Cabinet Work Programme, I don't think there's many more things to mention. There are some terms of reference coming through, one for the Coastal Forum, one for the Youth Council, which is progressing. And then just to note that there is confirmation there that the economic growth strategy is no longer coming forward. I think I personally, and I know the chairman has still been chasing whether we will get an action plan. I'm still not sure as to whether that's going to come prior to the election, but it's something I will continue to ask about.
Can we indeed, are you able to give us any clarification, Mr. Blatch, on that?
No, sorry, I don't have any. Hasn't been discussed with either.
Okay, I'm conscious we have the leader here, Councillor Adams. Are you able to give us any clarification in regard to that matter?
No, I'm not, to be honest with you. But I can I can certainly look into it.
Thank you. If you would, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, are you happy for me to move on to the overview and scrutiny work program?
Any questions on the cabinet work programme before we move on to the committee? No? Okay. Committee we go.
Okay, just another number of things to note. Next month is a fairly busy schedule. We should have Circa officers returning to give us hopefully a positive update on where they are now with bin collections. We have got the scheduled quarterly update on the North Walsham High Streets and Heritage Action Zone project. I will note that the director for place and climate change, the relevant director has confirmed that they will give me a full breakdown of the £400,000 funding uplift that was requested in December over in Scrutiny Committee. So that information is a lot later than we wanted, but we're finally getting it, hopefully. Following on from that, we've got an action plan for the planning service improvement plan. I note that we do have an ambulance response times monitoring item. I think Victoria had, Councillor Holiday had previously suggested that we get the officers in to provide that update. However, given the current industrial action underway and the extreme service pressures, discussed that with the chairman and suggested that's probably not very appropriate at the current time. So I think we're just going to have a look at the data, just to keep an eye on that. Car park usage monitoring, again, that report was something that was pulled, I think, in December or possibly before, and that's something that we are looking to bring back updated. So we'll see that in February. Officer delegated decisions, something we need to keep our eyes on. Hopefully we'll get that. And there was that request for a comparison or benchmarking of filming and garden bin charges. And obviously those were discussed again today as part of the fees and charges report. And it was actually mentioned that within that fees and charges report, even with the increase in garden bin charges, we are still lower than some neighbouring councils. Finally, just moving on to March, just to note that I have had confirmation from the Police and Crime Commissioner that he is able to attend our March meeting. He'll provide an update on the plan that he presented last year. And I've also asked for an update if there's any particular issues facing the constabulary at this time. Other than that, I think that brings us to pretty much the end of the year. I note that due to the election, everyone being particularly busy around that time, we don't have a scheduled meeting for April. So unless there is a particularly pressing issue that arises, March would be our last meeting of this council's term.
Okay, thank you. Questions in respect of our work programme? No? Okay, are you happy to note then both of those? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. That looks unanimous. Right. Okay, that completes the last substantive item on our agenda. There is one housekeeping matter which I think we will address after we've moved offline.
Yeah, if you just want to declare the meeting ended and then we can discuss.
Yes, I formally declare the meeting closed, and thank you for your